Goldman Sachs expects a beat and raise quarter with investor focus on any updates for its trillion-dollar data center revenue target. Let's discuss with the Bloomberg Tech co-host Caroline Hyde. She joins me here on set. So, I mean, this is the big daddy. This is what we've all been waiting for, right? And it comes, late in earnings season. They have to beat and raise. And even when they do, sometimes the stock still falls because everyone's already kind of looked at what the hyperscalers are spending, understanding that $725 billion capex for the rest of the full year, and can just see a wall of demand coming Nvidia's way. We want to get a little bit of context of how much like TPU over at Google or some of the basically the ASICs, the bespoke chips being made by the hyperscalers, whether that's eating in at all. But look, this is a $5.4 trillion company that is posting more than 70% revenue growth. This is inexplicable in many ways from the exponential nature of the company, but we want to hear about how they continue to ramp. Yes, you know that Blackwell is doing really well from an architecture perspective. How is Vera Rubin doing? How is the CPU trend doing? How are some of the purchases, talking of M&A? Remember, they bought in this rather odd acquisition, Grok, with a Q, not a K. How is that working in terms of the inference needs that they're getting? That's sort of some of the intricacies we want to get to grips with. But this is a stock that is relatively cheap, remember, in terms of its forward guidance. The PE ratios are like 24 in the forward 12 months. So people still think it's still relatively able to buy at this level. Amazing at this size. And the fact that it moves so much. I mean, on Friday, it was down more than 4%. On Thursday, it was up more than 4%. So we're talking about billions of dollars, on some days, hundreds of billions of dollars moving around. And that element, what sent it down on Friday, is China. And the fact that maybe we won't see suddenly that, what was it, $50 billion worth of TAM that he saw in the near term coming from China demand. He still can't get his H200s in there, Jensen Huang. So that's going to be we want to hear a little bit more detail of how he's feeling about the potential demand coming from China. He can get them in there. China
they
just don't want to take them, right?
Yeah,
so
US is saying go for it. Yeah. But meanwhile, China's like, no thanks, we want to build internally. We're dependent on Huawei and the likes. And so we heard that from President Trump. We're going to hear what Jensen Huang thinks about it as well.
China. Jensen, you just returned from China. On Friday on Air Force One, the president said that H200 came up, but that China's position is it wants to support its own industry. Could I just ask what the net outcome was of your trip to China and your understanding of what is not or is allowed with H200 and the customers that you have or do not have in China?
The president wants America to win everywhere.
Right.
The president wants America to lead the AI revolution. And so H200s are licensed to sell to China. The Chinese government has to decide how much of their local market do they want to protect and how much of their local market do they want to expand with more AI capacity. My sense is that the demand in China is so incredible. Just like it is here, agentic AI is also making enormous progress there. My sense is that over time, the market will open. President Xi was very clear that he wants China to be an even wider open market. Premier Li Qiang was very straightforward and explained very eloquently that China will be an open market. So I'm looking forward to China being a more open market.
To clarify, Jensen, you were able to meet with those officials directly to discuss whether or not you can sell to those Chinese tech companies.
I didn't discuss directly with them about H200.
Right.
I was there to represent the United States, and I was honored to do so. I was there to support President Trump, and really glad to do so. But that was really the focus of my trip. President Trump had some conversations with the leaders, and I'm looking forward to what they decide.
Michael, you did not go to China, but I think what's interesting is you are a member of the President's Council of Advisors for Science and Technology, as is Jensen. Your net conclusion on whether or not China will become open to American technology companies to do business there?
We have a business in China. Obviously, we comply with all the restrictions and various controls that are in place, but I hope that there's more economic collaboration between the United States and China. That ultimately is what will lead to greater outcomes and prosperity for everyone, and a greater likelihood of a successful relationship between the countries and around the world.
The final question on that trip, Jensen, is the sharpest rhetoric was probably on Taiwan. We've talked about the supply chain. But what did you take from those comments from President Xi on the issue of Taiwan? Of course, from a manufacturing capacity standpoint, TSMC is a critical partner. You and I have discussed it in the past, but at this moment in time, how top of mind is it for you, the security of supply from Taiwan?
Well, none of us were involved in any of those conversations except for President Trump. With respect to Taiwan, obviously Taiwan is still epicenter of the world's technology manufacturing and technology development. The supply chain is rich in Taiwan. We're also, of course, reindustrializing the United States, bringing manufacturing back to the United States. We're doing so at a time when demand for AI and this beginning of this new computer revolution is happening, and so demand is extraordinary. So as a result, we're building more factories here in the United States, chip factories, packaging, computer factories, AI factories, of course. So we're building factories of all kinds here. They're also ramping up capacity, and the reason for that is because the demand is just so great across the board. I think the answer is that we want to have, it is possible to have supply chain diversity and resilience, and everybody should be seeking to improve that. It is also very true that Taiwan will continue to be one of the epicenters of the world's technology hub.
This has an article today online that says how Nvidia stock could hit 300 after earnings. It could, but that hasn't necessarily been the case. How do you handle something where it's a great company, the numbers are always good, but the stock typically goes down?
It does, and it could happen again. I mean, it's the biggest company out there, right? We have to have exposure, and we do have exposure for our clients. At the same time, you mentioned it, they're going to crush it. We know they're going to crush it, but we can't lose sight of the fact that there are risks out there. Today has been a good day, but interest rates are up, inflation is up, Strait of Hormuz still not figured out. So I think this is a good time to take some profits, or you might see some of that from Nvidia. Right. So we could see the stock price down. That doesn't worry us. We're looking for stocks that are down to buy into.
And the long-term story, right? This is one of the slides from Jensen. We're early. 1,000 times more compute will be needed. I mean, the numbers are really. I started the show with just a mind-boggling graph, right? But it doesn't mean the market will go up in a straight line to match this.
Yeah, the market will not go up in a straight line, but if we're long-term investors, which we are, these are names we want to buy into. Never mind the backlog, the upgrade, and I see it mentioned here, the AI agentic upgrade, but also there's a cost component too, right? These big mega scalers do have to switch their chips, and I think that's going to happen. So in the near term, you see some volatility. We might see a pullback from Nvidia, but this is an early innings AI story. So this is one of the names we're holding for the long run.
I read where you made some changes to your portfolio with a macro futures overlay. How does that work?
Yes. Okay. So I want to stay in the game. I want to stay in equities. Unless one of my clients has a cash need, we talk about that separately. But for everyone else, I want to stay in the game. I want to be in equities. At the same time, I do think there's going to be some volatility because of some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. So basically, we're not removing or reducing equity exposure, but we do have a macro futures forward-looking or trend-following strategy. It's futures-based, basically, so that if equities do pull back, there's a way for us to actually perform and have a positive performance versus just take the negative.
I want to ask you about software. So we're making this move. First, it looked like a dead cat bounce. We took out the initial bounce in March. We finally broke through that. We're above the 200-day. How much, because you talked about opportunity already. Yeah. When you see something like this, do you start to say, okay, maybe this is where we want to start to get a greater exposure?
Yes, but not broadly. And I think there's a bifurcation happening in software. And I know you know that too, but there's a bifurcation happening. So we are looking closely at certain names. And there's going to be a difference between consumption-based pricing or seat-based pricing.
What is the biggest supply constraint or bottleneck for you right now?
Well, certainly, memory is a challenge. I think
it is memory.
The advanced node semiconductors are still challenging. It's really, we think about it from the things that we're producing, and the semiconductor supply chain is ramping, but the demand's growing faster than the supply.
In our case, we provide the technology integrated, and so the memory comes with our technology. Right. We've been planning our supply chain for a couple, 2-3 years. We have the largest supply chain in the world. Our partners have done a great job securing supply for us. And so all of the pieces go together. The CoWoS is lined up with the HBM, which is lined up with the Grace Blackwell and the CPUs. And the CoWoS-R, the CoWoS-L, the CoWoS-S, all of it is all lined up. The silicon photonics is lined up. Right. Everything is all lined up. It's just that the demand is much greater than the overall capacity of the world.
Impact of war on the markets as we see the strike deadline kicked off a couple days.
Well, I don't think anyone's too surprised that we're kind of kicking the can a little bit here, Morgan. You know, this is kind of the way this has been going. Clearly, we talked in the earlier segment about yields going higher. We still have energy prices. Right before I came on, you showed all those various commodity prices going higher. I think it's more just that inflationary growth world that we're in. And it's probably where we're going to be for a while still.
Yeah, and we've got elevated energy prices, Warren, and then this big run up in yields. I mean, a little bit more stabilization this morning, but overall just dramatic moves.
Yeah, so I think that they're kind of related. And so I do think that we started this war and everyone thought that we were going to be able to look through it and it was going to be kind of a short-lived outage in the oil market. And what we've started to look at is this relationship between yields, and not just yields, but the SOFR market, which is kind of looking out at what the Fed's going to do and the price of crude oil. And what we've seen is that as this last little bout of higher crude prices, we've seen the cuts come out of the SOFR market, and that's been a dramatic move. So we're transitioning, I think, and it's related to this outage from a cut cycle to a true hold, which is going to be a lot for the market to digest.
Yeah, it's a key point, Stephanie. I want to get your thoughts on it. I mean, just how much we've seen a shift in market sentiment towards the possibility of hikes now before the year is out. And of course, when we talk about the move in bonds, it is a global phenomenon, but then it also, to bring it back home, has knock-on effects on the consumer too as we look to retail earnings.
Right. I mean, we're watching oil, obviously, and the war and the news, and also interest rates. Those are the two things that are top of mind for just about everybody. And I think in terms of like the Trump tweets or on Truth Social, I think you kind of have to almost look through it because the fundamentals to this economy are actually quite good. The Atlanta Fed tracker is at 4%. I was looking at some of the credit card data for the consumer, and JP Morgan just came out with some credit card data for last month, and it's running up about, spending's running up about 6.5%. So I think the consumer continues to consume, and that's a good thing. If oil stays at these levels, it will obviously put pressure on the consumer. But for now, the consumer is able to kind of just plow through it, if you will. In terms of retail earnings, I mean, I think housing is going to be, I mean, at best in line. Maybe Lowe's does a little better because they're do-it-yourself and the weather's helping them. But I think Home Depot is much more cyclical. So I think there's a lot of levers that they can pull to actually just come in line. But I don't think it's anything to be excited about, not at like 18, 19 times forward estimates. Target is a different story because it's a turnaround story. So I think you got to pick and choose within retail. I happen to own Target.
How do you see it when we talk about retail, Ryan?
Well, I want to build on those concepts there. So obviously retail stocks in general have been weak. We saw the recent GDP number. The last 5 quarters, GDP has been about 2%. 45% of that has been from AI spending. So the consumer is a tad weak, but one of the areas we think the second half of this year, Morgan, that can do a lot better is the labor market, right? Unemployment rate is still near all-time lows or 40-year lows. You have initial jobless claims at 200,000. The ADP number continues to suggest there's better small business hiring. So I think the second half of this year, one thing no one's talking about is a labor market comeback, which clearly will help the consumer, potentially consumer spending, and we don't have to rely so much on AI to keep the economy moving.
Yeah. Warren, I want to get your thoughts, especially about this idea of an underlying economy that's actually very resilient, holding in there, and which is, I would argue, looking at some of the data we've gotten recently, being buoyed by the industrial side of the economy with this AI infrastructure build-out. Oh, by the way, defense spending showing up in some of those numbers, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the story, I think, there's been 2 forces. You've had the AI, the CapEx AI build out into strengthening economy and earnings story on one hand, and then obviously the Strait of Hormuz closure on the other hand. And they've battled it out, and obviously I think the bullish factors have won. And I do think it's about the resilient economy, and I think it's about the multiplier effect you get from all of this CapEx spending. We looked out and said, okay, sales growth in the next 24 months, you know, that we've seen this ramp up in analyst estimates. What does that equate to for nominal GDP terms? And it points to like a 6% nominal GDP world, which is robust growth. I mean, that's that in the post 1990s era, that's quite robust. And so I think that the tech stocks and a lot of the AI build out stocks remain kind of on the defensive side for all the reasons that Stephanie laid out. I mean, a lot of the stuff that's interest rate sensitive is going to struggle as long as the strait is closed. And so that leads people, if they want to participate in the earnings boom, they want to participate in the booming economy, they want to get into this tech space. So that's where I think the focus has been, and deservedly so.
Speaking of 1990s, Stephanie, we've heard more and more folks come out and make comparisons to 1999 and the late 1990s with what we're seeing with AI. Are they warranted?
Oh, absolutely not. I think that you're in the first or second inning with regards to AI, and exactly what you were just talking about in terms of the industrial economy. It's the AI food chain, Morgan. It is AI. It's you need data centers, more data centers. You've got to stick the stuff inside the data centers. And then you need the grid to get upgraded, and we don't have enough power. So all of those industries are benefiting substantially, and they're benefiting because of all the capex. Almost $800 billion in capex from most of the Mag 7s this year alone. That's up 75%. That is not going to change. Those numbers are only going to go higher. Maybe on a percentage basis they slow down, but they're still going to go higher in terms of capex. And as long as that happens, a lot of parts of the economy are going to benefit.